Hey, thanks for joining Next Gen Nerds. We're doing an interview with Patrick Hickey Jr. He is the founder and editor of Legacy Comix. He has written a series of books called Mind Behind the Games, and he currently voice acts for a bunch of different games, but currently he is working on Wrestlequest, which is being developed by Mega Cat Studios and published by Skybound Games. And finally, he's a professor of journalism. And let's just get right into it. I know that your start was like journalism. Like, what
hmm
really drove you towards that, I guess?
So when I was 18, I got in a serious car accident.
Okay.
Um, I was a delivery boy for a pharmacy in Brooklyn, and I'll never forget it. I was like 2 blocks away from my house, and I was riding the bike, and not sitting on the bike, like standing on the bike, going as fast as I possibly could. Like Marty McFly style, ET style, getting ready to fly and shit.
Yeah.
And this car was double parked and the guy just opened his car door out of nowhere. And I
Oh.
I I hit the door so hard that it bent the other way, and it like kind of like caught me right in the chest, knocked the air like completely out from under me, and everything just like kind of went black. And I ended up herniating some discs in my lower back, compressing some vertebrae in my neck, uh, broke a couple of ribs. And at that point, I mean, I was 6'4", I was like 220 pounds. Um, I was gonna like take off a year. This was like right after high school. I was gonna take off a year, and then I was gonna see if I could transfer to like a D3 like hockey program upstate or something like that. Like I really
Oh,
wanted to
okay.
try to play hockey, and yeah, the doctors were like, "Yeah, you're gonna need physical therapy for like 6 to 8 months," and blah 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 blah. And then that 6 to 8 months, I started writing a lot, and I was in a couple of bands, and grew my hair out long, and it was just like that hockey player was kind of like out the window. And it took about like 3 years for me to really like get on skates and get on bikes again and stuff like that, because it was just like that was one of the most painful things. Like that door just like literally scared the living shit out of me. Like it was like my life flashed before my eyes.
Yeah.
um so but like my life was like forever changed after that. And I mean, I think looking back, it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. A year and a half after the car accident, I went to college, and this is like back in the day, where you didn't register like on a computer. You went into like this big ass room, and they had all these professors there, and they would ask you what classes you want to take and blah blah blah. And like when you registered for a class, the note would get passed down, and they would just like check off the classes and stuff. So I ended up speaking to the head of the journalism program at the college that I went to, and he's like, "Oh, what are you into?" And I'm like, "Sports, video games, comic books, music." And he's just like, "Well, what do you like about those things?" And I told him, I'm like, "I've been reading since I'm 4 years old.
Yeah.
I'm like, since before kindergarten. I've always been a reader, comic books, books. I have like tons of almanacs, like baseball almanacs and football almanacs. I just For Christmas, that was always like a cheap gift, like 15 bucks. Give me the new Sports Illustrated, like football, year in review. And I would read through it, memorize everyone's stats and stuff like that. And he was like, "Oh, you should be a journalist." And I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." So I started taking journalism classes. And I would say, like, by the time I got my associate's degree, like 3 months later, after I got my associate's degree, I was covering minor league baseball and minor league hockey for a bunch of local newspapers in the area.
Okay.
And then I started working at the college that I went to as like a tutor. And then by the time I got my bachelor's degree from my second college, I was teaching at the same college that I had originally gone to. So like by 22, I was teaching college, which is pretty wild considering you know how
Everything.
you know everything happened. Then I went for my master's degree, and I was an editor at NBC for 3 years. Bunch of magazines in between, photography for the New York Daily News, the New York Times, and stuff. Tons of like big interviews, in music and video games and comics and sports and stuff. So it just kept scaffolding. And then like after I left NBC, because I got married and I didn't want to work 7 days a week anymore,
Oh, yeah.
my wife got pregnant. Um, so then I'm like, got to start doing some stuff that I'm not going to be able to do when I have kids. So that led to my first Minds Behind the Games book.
Yeah.
Um, and oh, that book's still like my baby. But now, I mean, I just finished my seventh manuscript that's coming out next year. So I mean, I've written 7 books since 2016, so that's pretty crazy. Um, and during that time, I've been covering video games as a journalist, so that's how I got in contact with the Mega Cat guys, because I saw this company out of Pittsburgh doing like brand new retro games like Sega
Oh yeah.
Genesis and Nintendo games. And I reached out to James and was like, you guys are doing really cool stuff. I'd love to interview you. And then James and I would periodically talk on the phone about like everything, about like, social media, about the state of journalism, about video games, blah, blah, blah. And then I started doing voice acting. Um, because this video game company from Bulgaria, out of all places, um, I reached out to them. I'm telling you, like my story, it's like Kramer from Seinfeld. Um, After my first book came out, I saw this game on Twitter, which I do that all the time. I'll go on Twitter and just like kind of troll like indie games and see like what's hot and stuff. And I saw this game. It was called The Padre, and it looked like Minecraft had like a baby with like the original like Alone in the Dark or like Resident Evil. I'm like, this is really cool. So I reach out to the team. I'm like, I'd love to do an interview with you guys for my website, reviewfix.com. And they're like, okay. So we do a Q&A, like email Q&A, and tons and tons of typos. I'll never forget. And I had to just go through it and like really clean it up. But it got good traffic. It got super good traffic. And they're like, oh, you want to play the game? And I'm like, sure. So they send me like a Steam invite, and I start playing the game, and I notice like right away, like the first line in the game is it's been a week since the disappearance of Cardinal Benedictus, and it's like week, Week, and it was spelled Weak. So I
That's
messaged
like
them and I'm like, guys, yes, the same noise you just made. I was like, guys, like this game is like heavy on narrative. Like there cannot be like any typos. Like the grammar's got to be cleaned up. I'm like, it plays good. The music is great. I'm like, it's a lot of fun, but you're gonna lose a lot of people. So they're like, you're a college professor, right? I'm like, yeah. They're like, you want to edit all the dialogue? And I was like, do you want to pay me?
yeah.
And they were like, sure. So it was so funny. I spent probably like 4 hours just fine tooth comb throughout all the dialogue. I send it back to them. They're like, do us a favor, um, log out of Steam, like shut down your Steam, turn it back on. There's gonna be an update, update the game, then refire it back up. I do it, and it's like all of my corrections are in there, and I'm like, I just worked on my first video game. This is awesome. Um, so then like a couple of weeks later, check clears. They message me again, and they're like, oh, we have more. So I'm like, oh, okay, you can pay me again? They're like, yes. So I do some more. Then they're like, oh, we're going to Kickstarter. We need you to edit the entire Kickstarter. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of pressure. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Fuck it. Let's do it. So I do it, and like literally like right before the Kickstarter is supposed to start, they're like, I'll never forget it, in like their thick Bulgarian accents. They're like, oh, we're fucked. We're fucked. I'm like, what's the matter? And they're like, the voice actor left. The main voice actor, like the main character. And I was like, guys, that's not a problem. And they're like, why? I'm like, he wasn't very good. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm just like, every time he spoke, I like cringed. And it was like, imagine a survival horror game starring Russell Brand. It's like, walking through like this dark mansion, it's like, wow, and I'm, oh man, I used to just like cringe. So they're like, oh, we need another voice actor. Do you know anybody? Because I know a lot of people in video games and stuff. I've been doing video game journalism forever. I've written books. I've interviewed hundreds of developers, from the
Yep.
Atari 2600 to now. They're like, do you know anybody? I'm like, I could do it. They're like, really? I'm like, yes, I could do it. So I go in my man cave, and I'm like, I know that for some reason, they wanted this guy to have an English accent. The name of the game is the Padre, so I'm guessing he's Hispanic priest, but they wanted him to have like an English accent. So I'm like, let's keep it. So I have to work around the English accent. So I've always been super good at that, like Pablo Francisco, Don LaFontaine, like movie trailer, like
In a world, one man, one tortilla, rated PG-13.
you know. But I'm like, can't do that because that would just be the most hilarious thing
Oh
ever.
yeah.
Could you have, like like the main character in the game, thousands of lines of dialogue just talking like that? So I'm like, I'm gonna add that English accent.
So I came across this dark, brooding English voice. My name is Alexander, and I am the Padre.
And they were like, oh shit, dude. They're like, that's perfect. And we ended up not getting funded on Kickstarter, but we got picked up by Feardemic, and Feardemic published the game on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Switch, Steam, and then the sequel came out last year, The Padre One Shell Straight to Hell. That was just on Steam, because the developer and the publisher were having like tons and tons of issues. I mean, I'm like currently under like NDA, but like I could say that like the game was definitely good enough to be on Switch. It's a better game than the original, but they didn't market it the way that it should have been marketed, and
Yeah.
therefore wasn't released on console. But like what happened was, because of that, James from Megacat saw Padre, and he was just like, oh, you're doing voice acting now? And I'm like, yeah. And then in the meantime, I had done trailers for like maybe like 15 other games and Kickstarter trailers, and I was making money. And he was like, oh, we have this wrestling game. And this was probably like 2 years ago. And he was like, yeah, we have this wrestling game. And then they sent me like lines for like 30 characters. And then that was supposed to be like it, like all the unlicensed characters. And then it's just like, oh, well, do you want to do this? And do you want to do that? To the point where it's like, now I'm voicing like 100 characters in this game.
Oh yeah.
It's been so much fun. Like and I'm not just saying this, and I think you could tell already that like I just don't like blatantly throw compliments around. Um, I love those guys. Like I think Zach Manco from Megacat is one of the most underrated writers in all of video games, not just indie games. Because like we've worked together on World Championship Boxing Manager, which I do like 30 voices for. We worked together on a couple of other things that are like in the pipeline and stuff, and I just have a ton of respect, like writer to writer. Like whenever we meet up, like whenever we do an event together and all the guys go out, I'm not a drinker. I'm like the real CM Punk. I don't drink. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I never have, never will. And Zach is a family guy too, so it's like usually like when the guys go out, like Zach and I are usually like the first two to retire, and I love to pick his brain and talk about writing and things like that. We always like compare notes and stuff. So it's just like the writing in Wrestlequest is super super good. And when you're talking about an RPG that's over 30 hours, if the writing's not good, you're not going to play it. So it's just like I feel like when WrestleQuest comes out, people are going to be like, the story is really good. And I'm going to tell them like that's Zach Manco, you
Yeah.
know? So, and Mitch, the guy that does the audio, has been a blast to work with. And then there's just so many bells and whistles under the hood, like Andy that does a lot of the animations. Like it's a pixel art heavy game, but it's just got like great lighting. There's just everything is just super solid. So it's just like I've probably worked on in between like 15 and 20 games, and some of those games when people are like, oh, you worked on that, I'll be like, yeah, I did. But it's just like WrestleQuest. I mean, WrestleQuest is really something special. So that's like how I kind of got started as a writer, and then the books. And I mean, in between that, I started a comic book company that's doing really good now. So
That
and
had to
then
have
I
been
mean,
just a,
that was insane.
a scary endeavor.
It was. It was. And then like I mean, we had a lot of stuff going on maybe like 3 months ago that like we had to work through. Nothing like necessarily bad, but it's just like if you've ever read anything by Jack Welch, he's the former CEO of General Motors.
Okay.
And he writes a lot of he's written a lot of books on business and things like that, and he says something along the lines of like every year you have to cut your bottom 10%.
Yeah.
Like even if you had a record breaking year, your lowest 10%, they need to go, because you need to send an example to the rest of your people. So I mean, we were basically in a situation where it was like, well, what if your lowest 10% is like executive?
Yeah.
And I had to have a conversation with the rest of my team, And I was like, listen, I'm gonna make a move, and if you guys are with me, then just stand behind me. And I had to go to somebody, and I was like, listen, it's not working out. Let's do the right thing. Let's do this amicably. Let's not, get lawyers involved. Like, let's do the right thing. And they said, sure. So, like, we've had, like, in the last 2 months, like, more growth than we had, like, our first 8 months. And it's just, like, the next 2 or 3 months are going to be great for us because, like, there's so many things going right with Legacy. And it's just, like, hard business decisions, but, like, learning lessons where it's just, like, yeah, man, sometimes you have to be a prick.
Oh, well, yeah.
And it's and I tell James from Megacat all the time, whenever I go on a trip with them or something like that, that it's just like just being under like his learning tree and seeing the way that he deals with people has like helped me so much as like, a CEO and an entrepreneur and stuff like that, because the way he runs his company is exactly the way that like a good company should be run. Like he's a rock star. Like
Yeah.
he treats everyone like an equal, so it's like it's funny because I have friends that are like, you have 5 books in Harvard, Yale, Stanford, UCLA, like University of Shanghai, and you went to Seattle 2 weeks ago and you were dressed up as the Macho Man Randy Savage all day. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, why? They're like, you're the voice actor. You could have just been the voice actor. And I was like, because I have that much faith in James and that company that like I would do that. That I would dress up as Macho Man all day because I believe in those guys. And like I felt like I said to James, because when we were in Tennessee for Ric Flair's last match, this guy came and he was in full macho gear. And I was like, oh my, but he couldn't do the voice. He didn't have the voice. Yeah. So if he would have done the voice, I would have been petrified because I would have been like, oh shit, like maybe I'm out of a job here, But it like hit me, and I'm just like, if we had somebody like that at the booth, that would be so much fun for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I went to James like right after when that guy left. James was like, that guy had like a really cool costume. Like, how about this? How about you get me a cosplay? You hook me up with a cosplay, and I will do that at the next event. He's like, get out of here. I'm like, dude, I'm serious. And he's like, let's do it. So it was a lot of fun. That was like my first time ever like cosplaying, and like I had a ton of fun. So but I think it made our booth like special. I think like people got a kick out of it and stuff. I mean, I was doing like cream shots with people.
Yeah.
Like cream of the crop and stuff. Like it was ridiculous. We were having a lot of fun. This time is just messing with people.
Yeah.
And it's like I felt like the people that came to our booth got a little like release from like reality. Like we were just being silly and stupid and just having a good time. So I felt like that was a fun experience for me. So that's kind of like my story.
It was a blast, man. It was funny because my niece had never really been into wrestling, and so she was like, oh man, he sounds so cool and he's all dressed up, like who is he? And I was like, oh, I gotta show you some like Macho Man stuff. And I showed her the creamer thing, the cream of the crop, and she was like laughing about it. And then the next day we were eating breakfast and there was like the cups of creamer. She's like, I'm stealing a few of those and I'm gonna give them to him. Say it's for the cream of the crop. And so I was like, all right, that's cool. And so she was super pumped to give them to you. That was pretty funny.
I'm gonna be brutally honest, man. Like right before that happened, I went to go get a drink because I was just sweating so much in that jacket and that wig.
Oh,
and,
I know,
oh my god. So like I went to like the other side of PAX West to get like some, like I wanted a Gatorade. I didn't want water. I wanted something with some flavor.
Yeah.
And like 14-year-old kid is like, just like walks up to me like dead in my face and is like, who are you supposed to be? Like, what's your cosplay? And I'm just like, excuse me? And he's like, I don't know who the fuck you're supposed to be. And I'm like, well, if you don't know who I am, then there's no reason for me to tell you. Like, it's all good, man. Have a good day. And I was just like, wow, like that kid was out there, and it just made me like that was like the lowest I was like the entire PAX. And then I came back and I had told Zach, and Zach's like, don't worry about it. He's like, you look great, people loving you, blah blah blah. And I was just like, wow, like this is like what cosplayers have to deal with, like people just being stupid and stuff like that. Because up until that point, like everyone was like super positive, everyone was having fun
yeah.
with me and stuff like that. And then so I told Zach, and then I went to go call my wife. And as I'm going to call my wife, that's when I saw you guys. And oh, that was your niece, man. She totally like I will never forget that the rest of my life. Like that was like she was a sweetie pie. I was just like, oh, that's what that was the exact reason why I was doing it. You know, so it's like she was educated. She didn't know who Macho Man was before. Now she's educated as to who Macho Man is.
Yep.
She's at a video game con, so now she's automatically awesome. And now she's getting the inside jokes, and now she's like a part of it. You know, so
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah, man. So that's just a win. Like that's a win on so many levels.
So, well, I'm glad that it was, you know, the lift on a low point right there. So,
Oh yeah,
that's good,
yeah.
man.
90% of the people that like I had like old ladies going ooh yeah to me
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and it was like I loved it. You know, I had this other woman came over to me and she like grabbed me by the hand and she goes, oh my god, you're the best, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, you felt like touching me, like that's awesome. I must have like, you know, because like again we live in a time where like people don't do that anymore, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm very much like looking people in the eyes, shaking their hands and stuff like that. I might have hugged your niece, you know.
Yeah. Well, you took a
'Cause
picture with your arm around her and you were doing
yeah,
the
because I was
Macho Man look on. It was
yeah,
pretty good.
because I was like, yeah, man, like I feel like that goes a long way with people, you know. And it's just like for that woman to come over and just like want to like, you know, squeeze my hand and be like, oh, you're great, blah blah blah. I was like, that's awesome. So a lots of good moments, despite like, you know, like one or two like crappy ones. So
Yeah.
it was definitely fun.
I've had the most fun at a couple of cons, which was PAX West. And one of my favorite memories is they were, if you got a Mohawk, you got a free Far Cry game. So I was getting,
Nice.
I signed up for it, but like 3 people ahead of me in this line to get your head shaved was this lady who had to be in her, like, I think she said she was like 63, something like that. And she was there to play video games, but knew that her like granddaughter played Far Cry and was getting her
Awesome.
head shaved into a Mohawk to get her this game. And I was like, dude, this is the kind of stuff that I like. It brings
Yep.
like the community
Absolutely.
together. And I was like,
Yep.
this feels good. But yeah.
Hell yeah.
Do you know who John St. John is by chance? He's a voice
John St.
actor
John.
too. He does Duke Nukem.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he has his own convention now that he does on a cruise. It's
I
the
love it.
craziest. It's so much fun. It's pretty small, and it was kind of like at PAX with your booth where just everybody's kind of just chilling and talking with each other. That was probably the most fun that I've had at a con, is just like being able to sit down and like talk with music producers and writers and voice actors and all that stuff. We did
Absolutely.
karaoke,
Oh,
like,
so good.
and they did some of the karaoke in their like voices, so it was really
That's
really
so
fun.
great.
Thanks for watching part 1 with Patrick Hickey Jr. We're gonna pick up with his book series and maybe a little bit about some of the conventions he's been to. But anyway, come back for part 2. It'll be linked below. Thank you. Bye.